most part in recent decades.
Exactly. Well, the threat for more severe storms does continue today following 3 days of dangerous weather. Now, a lot of the thunderstorm action is out over the Gulf. That's where we've got much more in the way of lightning and that bigger shield of heavy rain. So the oranges, the yellows, that's the moderate to heavy downpours. We do have a little bit of that, a line moving through parts of the state of Mississippi that has been producing at least some lightning, but it's really the rain that's been the bigger issue, and I think will continue to be the issue through the remainder of today. Again, New Orleans, a little bit of a break. We've got more rain back here, so not done with the rain today in the New Orleans metro, and already we've seen 1.6 inches of rain off to the east side of town, well to the south, over 2.5 inches, and those are 3-hour totals. So really soaking rainfall came through. Now we've got more rain on the way. We'll watch for the possibility that could tip the scales and give us at least the potential for some localized flash flooding. Visible satellite, obviously you can see the blow up of the cloud cover down around the Gulf Coast. Earlier today, it was parts of the Texas Gulf Coast getting in on the huge rainfall rates, including places like Galveston. Over the last 3 hours, we have seen available energy building here into South Texas. I think that's going to be the prime spot to watch later today for any possible severe weather. With that said, we are not dealing with the severe weather risk of the weekend or Friday. It's an isolated risk at best today. Again, that doesn't mean if you don't get a severe storm in your community, it's not impactful, but we're just not going to see the amount that we saw. You can see the future radar does pick up on a few individual cells later this evening, post dinner time or around dinner time, depending on what time you eat. And we'll be watching these rain showers and storms through parts of Mississippi and Louisiana. I think they lose their punch as we get beyond sunset, but could see one turn a little spicy, so can't rule out an isolated severe warning there. Tomorrow, we amp up the severe threat just a little bit for parts of Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, a little bit of South Dakota as well. Unfortunately, Omaha, I know areas to the south and west of Des Moines, you don't want to see that coming back into play. I don't think it's as significant of a threat as what we had on Friday. But again, Dr. Knapp can't rule out tornadoes, damaging winds, or hail, even just the rain. You know, these areas need the rain, but we'd like to take a break. These communities still working very hard to get the weekend.
All hazards on the table.
Yeah, and slow-moving system providing that chance of flash flooding each and every day, Tuesday into Wednesday, Wednesday into Thursday, Thursday into Friday, all bringing the risk. I think better chances the later in the week that we get. But as Dr. Knapp mentioned, Oklahoma, one of those states that finds themselves several days under that threat. Here's a look at the forecast. Over the last 7 days, we've seen a ton of rain in these areas. Now, some of these areas needed the rain. So that's not to say it was a bad thing. But again, you get too much too fast. That causes problems. So 3 to 5 inch totals where you see the yellow, where you see the orange, those are 5 to 8 inch amounts. Where you see the red, that's 8 to 12 inches, just within the last week. So again, soils are saturated. We'd like to take a breather, but we know we've got more rain on the way. Moisture being pulled north out of the Gulf of Mexico early to midweek, but mid to late week, you can see another slug of moisture comes in as waves of low pressure develop along a frontal boundary. That's going to help to trigger shower, thunderstorm development, and again, slower moving waves of rain across sections of the central part of the country into the Midwest. As that moisture is pulled northward, we'll have plenty to work with. So some of these showers and storms could again be bringing some heftier rainfall rates that could again tip the scales towards the flash flooding side of the story. Wednesday afternoon, Kansas City into parts of Nebraska. Yeah, we've got some showers and thunderstorms. I think that's where the most significant chances are. But Oklahoma down into Texas, overnight into Thursday, things really get going. We'll keep it going, keep it soggy during the day Thursday and even into Friday. You can see a pretty active pattern, a pretty unsettled pattern ahead for these areas. I mentioned they do need the rainfall in a lot of these communities, so especially into parts of Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, where you see the oranges and the reds, those are worse levels of drought. So that's where we've got the severe or the extreme drought levels. Also parts of Texas. We just need a break. You know, folks are trying to clean up from the tornadoes on Friday across parts of Iowa and Nebraska. Parts of Oklahoma, of course, saw the storms on Saturday. So we've already got a lot of damage. We have things that need to get done, and rain doesn't help us there. Unfortunately, the rain is going to stick around Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all the way through Thursday night. Looking at rainfall totals for many in that 1 to 3 inch range, especially Texas up through Minnesota and Wisconsin. Well, coming up on the show, the hurricane hunters, they are just over 1 month away from the official start of hurricane season, June 1st, of course, one that is expected to be incredibly active.
And of course, that means the hurricane hunters are busy preparing for what is expected to be an extremely busy season. this year. All of the different outlook forecasters are talking about above average, especially when you have a departing El Nino and the Atlantic water temperatures are super warm. I'm not shocked to see these high numbers.
Yeah, so again, doesn't necessarily mean or say where they will or could hit, but preparation always key regardless of if it's a busy or a quieter season, because as we know, it only takes one. But we want to bring in Jonathan Shannon, public affairs specialist. Again, expected to be very active season. I've got to imagine that could impact your crews and your planes as well.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. You know, as we talk to you, we're looking at video of both NOAA and Air Force hurricane hunters, and there's a distinction in your mission, right? Because you guys are doing primarily research, but then the Hurricane Center gets that data in real time. Is that still the case this year? And what are your research objectives this year as you feed that data to the Hurricane Center in real time?
With the expectation that this is going to be a very busy season, I've got to imagine there could come a time where we could have multiple storms and you've got to prioritize, of course, where you do your missions. How do you prioritize?
Update us on the status and the age of your primary aircraft and how you're keeping them maintained, and how much longer will these particular aircraft be in service?
It's a real thing. I think about it every time I work out.
As do I. And which one of these names this year is going to be the big bad major hurricane? Which ones?
Or could it be? I was going to say a few. We'll be right back.
Supercells. And you went through one warning and then another one was right behind it.
It was a really, really tough go for a lot of folks. It just unrelenting weekend. And we still have at least a chance of severe weather today. I'm not as concerned, but Dr. Nab, tomorrow, midweek, we see the levels or the possibilities rise once again.
Yeah, it'll be another dangerous week for some folks, at least a risk of it. And it's hard to prepare while you're also recovering, but that's the reality we face in the peak of the severe weather season.
Absolutely. We got you covered with everything. We're looking at a low-end chance, really an isolated risk of severe weather today. Parts of Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, then down into Texas. I think South Texas may have a little better chance of seeing one or two storms get a little feisty. Right now, we've got quite a bit of thunderstorm action out over the Gulf. Very heavy rain coming down with this as well. Into parts of Mississippi, you can see some of the heavier downpours edging off to the east slowly. This is going to make travel difficult. And again, while we've got a few thunderstorms on the line, nothing at this point has been severe. That's not to say one couldn't strengthen as we finish off the afternoon or head into the evening. We've also got a little activity coming off the Gulf as that moisture, that southerly flow allows for showers and maybe a few thunderstorms to develop into parts of Alabama, parts of West Florida as well. As we move through the afternoon, though, the available energy is on the rise farther into Texas, where we've been dry for a couple hours, especially the south central part of the state where you've been dry throughout the day. You know, Beaumont area, you guys were soaked this morning, soaked around Slidell a few hours ago. New Orleans area, you saw some potent showers moving through. Hattiesburg, right now, we've got some heavy downpours, frequent lightning. Actually, I shouldn't even say frequent lightning. A few lightning strikes really serves this justice. So nothing crazy heavy, nothing crazy strong at this point. But definitely, if you're out on the roads, that kind of rain not making your life any easier. Through the remainder of the afternoon and evening, we've got the showers around New Orleans that will persist. Again, watch for showers and thunderstorms, Mississippi, Alabama, West Florida. I don't think many of those are going to get out of hand. Dr. Nab, here into South Texas, you can see future radar does pick up on a few individual cells. Again, those could get a little spicy.
Yeah, so we're gradually
a month and 2 days away from the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. So it is coming up, and it is coming up quickly. That time will fly. It'll be here before we know it. And Dr. Nab, this is anticipated to be potentially a blockbuster system. Again, you don't know how bad a system or a season will be, but you do know that it could be an active one.
Yeah, and it's so important for each one of us to really fully understand our risk. You know, one bad storm, one bad hurricane in our community could be a bad year for us. But what are we at risk from, and what have we not done that really needs to be done now to increase our chances of not just surviving the storm, but lessening damage and recovering in the aftermath?
Yeah, so you're going to be focusing on that through the week. Dr. Nab taking a look throughout this week at areas that are maybe more vulnerable to things that they haven't seen in a while or just storms in general. And today, you're talking about Houston, and you're talking about the vulnerability. I know a lot of people just went, wait a second, the Houston Metro just dealt with Harvey, a few years ago. But you pointed out that was a flood event. It was a tropical storm when it was over Houston. You're really concerned about what a powerful hurricane producing very strong winds could do in Houston.
Yeah, we're talking about the top 5 metros, in my estimation, that are overdue for a major hurricane wind event, especially, but also the other effects of a major hurricane. And number 5 on that list is the Houston area. And again, Harvey was not a major hurricane event for the Houston area. It was a tropical storm flood disaster. It was awful.
People would have thought, but how did they not get ready after that? Why wasn't that the wake-up call? You're saying they're still not prepared.
Yeah, I think the thing is that Harvey woke everybody up to just how bad the flooding can really get in Houston. And not everybody has flood insurance there yet, so we still have things to do to get ready for flooding in Houston, mitigating flood, having that flood insurance. But what Harvey was not for Houston was not a big wind event.
Right.
And I would say we're generally not as ready for wind in the Houston area as we are in other hurricane-prone areas, say like Miami or Fort Lauderdale.
We had a report last week that said, which states and building codes that were really good when it came to getting homes and businesses ready. Texas isn't one of those, and thus the Houston metro area isn't one of those where, the building codes are maybe up to your standards.
Yeah, and so that's a concern for places like closer to Rockport that actually did get the major hurricane landfall in those conditions. But notice how Houston, which is farther to the north here, experienced a tropical storm going nearby. And this was what a former slow-moving, former major hurricane slow-moving can do in terms of the flood disaster. But again, this was not a major hurricane wind event for the Houston area. Now, let's talk about Houston's major hurricane history. We've been really fortunate in the Houston area. And again, as someone who used to live there when I was growing up, I've got family there, my mom's there. I'm thankful for her sake and others that you haven't dealt with a direct hit from a major hurricane. Now, in recent years, we've had the likes of Rita and Laura miss off to the east, and we did have Alicia in 1983. I was in Houston for Hurricane Alicia in 1983. Now, it was bad, but it could have been a lot worse because it was just over that Cat 3 threshold when it made landfall in southeast Texas. Most of the Houston area did not experience major hurricane conditions. It could be so much worse. And look at this long history. Way before the Houston population was as large as it is now, we had a lot of major hurricanes, but not so much direct hits missing off to the south and west. So what has hit major hurricanes in Houston has been a long time ago and not a direct hit.
And you pointed out the population hasn't exploded. So there may be people living there that don't have the experience. We brought up the ratings of the states. Obviously, Louisiana, talk about the building codes, how good they are. Not necessarily the case in Texas. So a viewer watching from the Houston area has got to be wondering, what do I do, Dr. Knapp?
Yeah, and again, these ratings had their focus on how ready is each state in terms of its building codes, the minimum legal requirement for how strong the structures are to be prepared for the wind. And Texas has a very old, pretty outdated statewide building code. It's like more than 20 years old. Now, in Texas, you focus on the individual cities having their own individuality on building codes and their own laws. But most cities in Houston have a fairly outdated building code as well.
Right.
Now, whatever it is that Houston has for building codes isn't enough, because look at how few people in the Houston area have shutters on their homes compared to what you see in South Florida. So what concerns me is that in Houston, we wait until they get their Andrew, a direct hit from a 4 or a 5, and there's massive wind damage, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, we need shutters on the homes here.
Right.
That fortunate recent history from major hurricanes maybe makes people have a false sense of security that, well, we're more prone to flood than we are wind. But we need to start getting shutters on the homes in Houston, changing the building codes to require that on new construction. Or else we got to rely on everybody putting up plywood. And is everybody going to do that? We're just not ready for a major wind event in Houston.
And given the size, is there going to be enough plywood to go around if push comes to shove and we've got that need?
Right. So we got to be proactive, not reactive. And in South Florida, because of what we saw in Andrew, we were more ready for Ian.
Yeah.
So don't wait for your Andrew in Houston to be ready for the one that's 20 years down the road. We got to get more ready with shutters in Houston.
All right, great information. We're going to be doing this all week long. Stay tuned. We're back after this. Across parts of Louisiana at this point, no active warnings, but I think really flooding is the bigger concern today as opposed to the severe weather, especially compared to what we've had over the last few days. Severe weather, not out of the question, but anything we see today should be pretty isolated in nature, and that would be parts of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and a little bit of South Texas. So you can see the areas are smaller, fewer, farther between. Right now, a lot of the heaviest, steadiest rain and the most frequent of lightning, the worst of the storms, is out over the Gulf of Mexico. With that said, we do have have a few thunderstorms into parts of Mississippi and extreme eastern parts of Louisiana. Again, that steadier rain continues around Baton Rouge, headed towards New Orleans. We've seen the rain come to an end into parts of East Texas, where, boy, it was a really soggy end of your weekend and start to your week. Almost 1,300 lightning strikes coming out of this system. Again, most of that is over the Gulf, but you can see we've got an electrified complex of thunderstorms bringing heavy rain. Luckily, at this point, it's mostly over the Gulf and not over communities that would be dealing with some definitive flood problems if it was raining in these areas. We do have heavy rain along I-10, areas east of 55 there in the state of Mississippi. A few lightning strikes, but again, nothing overly strong or even severe at this point. Anything we see in the realm of severe today is going to be isolated at best. Last 12 hours, you can see the rainfall rates were pretty impressive off to the west, and so that allowed those rain totals to really pile up. A lot of 3 to 5, even some 5 to 8 inch totals into parts of Louisiana, the central northern part of the state. We had, again, a flash flood warning that expired at the top of the hour in Lafayette. Now we've got some rain on tap for the New Orleans area. I do think we've seen it back off in the intensity, so I don't know that we're going to see prolific flash flooding problems. Could we see an isolated warning? Sure, because we've already had a lot of heavy rain out there today, and you just get a little bit more, and that just leads you to that flash flood criteria. So we'll watch for that. But again, I don't expect this to be widespread issues. As we move into the later evening, could watch for a few thunderstorms to get spicy. Again, you saw some of that isolated activity into parts of South Texas. So overall, considering where we've been, today is not going to be nearly as active, but we can't completely rule out severe weather altogether. And again, I think the threat moving forward today over the next few days is going to err a little bit more on the flood side. But Dr. Knabb, severe threat does go up into tomorrow and Wednesday.
Yeah.
Welcome into Weather Underground on this Monday. I'm Alex Wilson alongside our hurricane expert, former director of the National Hurricane Center, Dr. Knabb. You're going to be talking about some of these very vulnerable cities. Just what, a month and 2 days ahead of the start of hurricane season. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and my friends and family members in Houston are going, what are you saying, Knabb, that we're overdue for a hurricane? Didn't we have Harvey in 2017? Right. But remember, in Houston, that was a tropical storm induced flood disaster for Houston. And what I want to do is get everybody ready for a wind event that we have mostly avoided in Houston in recent decades.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, of course, we're winding down after a very active few days of severe weather. Now, the threat for more severe storms after a very active few days of severe weather. Now, the threat for more severe storms does